Hello, in this video I'll show you how to make fresh mozzarella cheese. Once the mozzarella starts to come together, everything moves pretty quick, so I set out everything that I'm going to need first. I have a bowl of room temperature water, a bowl to form the mozzarella over, a strainer, food-safe heat-resistant gloves, and a digital thermometer. Then I combine 1½ teaspoons of citric acid with 1 cup of water and 1/4 teaspoon of liquid rennet with 1/4 cup of water. I stir each of the bowls to make sure the ingredients are equally distributed. Once all the prep work is done, I pour 1 gallon of milk into my pot that I'm using to make the mozzarella. I recommend using a 6-quart pot because you'll be able to fit all the liquid into here without being too close to the edges of the pot. Then I add in the 1 cup of water with 1½ teaspoons of dissolved citric acid. I slowly stir this while heating the milk to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Using the right type of milk is the key to success for mozzarella. It's best to use whole milk because it has a higher fat content, so you'll have a creamier, richer cheese. It's also very important not to use milk that was pasteurized at an ultra-high temp. This UHT, or ultra-high temp pasteurization, typically occurs over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and when milk goes over 185 degrees Fahrenheit, some of the enzymes are destroyed and the proteins are denatured. Mozzarella is formed from the casein protein in the milk, so we need to make sure that the milk has never gone over 185 degrees Fahrenheit, or else the proteins won't separate and the curd won't form. The introduction of the citric acid and the rennet is what is going to cause the casein and whey proteins to separate from each other. As you get close to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, you should notice some of the milk starting to form small curds on the surface. Once the milk hits 90 degrees Fahrenheit, I pour in the liquid rennet that's dissolved in the 1/4 cup of water. I pour in the rennet while stirring, and then I set a timer to stir for an additional 30 seconds. I'm stirring top to bottom all the way across the pot to make sure that the rennet is evenly distributed. The rennet will cause curd formation very quickly, which is why we only stir for 30 seconds, or else you can start breaking up the curds. As soon as the 30 seconds are up, I take the pot off the heat and cover it with its lid. Then I set a timer for 5 minutes to allow the curd to start to form. After 5 minutes, I take the lid off and check to see if I have curds formed. Any curds will be floating at the top of the liquid, and you should be able to separate them from the liquid whey underneath. The whey underneath should be clear and a slight yellow color. I had a really nice curd separation, so I'm using a long knife to cut 1-inch cubes. You want to make sure to get close to the bottom of the pan, but of course don't scratch the pot you're using with your knife. If after 5 minutes you don't have good curd separation from the whey, you can let this set longer. You can let it set up to about 30 minutes. However, if after 30 minutes you don't have great curd formation, I would recommend starting over with a different type of milk. Once I have the 1-inch cubes cut, I'm going to heat the whey and curds to 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I stir really slowly and gently while doing this, so I'm trying not to break up any of the curd that's formed. However, I also need to stir a bit to make sure that the water at the bottom of the pot isn't overheating and I can evenly heat the curd and the whey throughout the pot. Once the curd and the whey is up to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, I season everything with 1 tablespoon of salt. Then I take the pot off the heat again. Now I slowly stir everything together for another 2 to 5 minutes. The longer that I stir the curd during this 2 to 5 minutes, the more firm that the cheese is going to be. Also during this time, I've turned on the tea kettle to boil some water, and I transfer that water into a sauce pot on the stove. This water will be used to slightly melt the cheese so that we can form it into mozzarella balls. Then I scoop the curd into a colander to strain out the extra liquid. Once the curd is scooped out, you can set the heat for this pot to low, but the liquid shouldn't go over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. This can just be used to keep the curd warm while it's waiting to be shaped. Now I scoop out a little bit of curd at a time and hold it in the water. This water should be no more than 175 degrees Fahrenheit. I hold the curd in the water for about 15 seconds just so that it will heat up and become pliable. Then, using the food-safe, heat-resistant gloves, I turn the curd out into my hands and start to form it. I work the curd together in my hands to get it to start to come together and form the shape of a ball. Once everything starts to come together, I'm able to stretch it into shape. If the curd isn't coming together nicely, that means it probably cooled off too much, so I put it back into the scooper and hold it in the hot water for a little bit longer. After reheating again, it's starting to pool really nicely. I think the best way to form mozzarella is to pull it long and fold it over on itself a couple of times. I'll do this 4 to 6 times, knowing that every time that I fold the mozzarella over on itself, it gets a little bit firmer. Then, for shaping the actual mozzarella ball, I form a C or an O with my thumb and first finger and push the cheese curd up through that hole. I push from the bottom and then tuck any of the loose edges from the bottom up into the ball. Then I place this in room temperature water to rest. I repeat this whole process again with some new cheese curd from the colander. This time, as I make the second mozzarella ball, I'm going to give some tips and tricks. One tip is that the amount of time that the curd needs to set in hot water in order to come up to temperature and be pliable is based on how much curd you have in the scooper at the same time. I'm going to be using these mozzarella balls to form mozzarella sticks, so I wanted fairly large mozzarella balls in order to have a good sized mozzarella stick. Because of this, I have quite a bit of cheese curd in the scooper, which means I need to hold it in the hot water a little bit longer than if I had less curd and was making a smaller mozzarella ball. The second tip is that I really only count the number of stretches and folds that I do on the mozzarella ball after it's heated enough that it's stretching smoothly and not tearing. This is because the mozzarella dries out and becomes firmer as I make those stretches, but I typically don't start making those stretches until the last time after I take it out of the hot water. So if I'm trying some folds and end up putting the mozzarella back into the water, I'll start my counting over again. However, I do try to keep in mind how much time and effort it took to get the curd to come together initially, because all of that time is still making the mozzarella a little bit more tough. So if it took a while to get it to combine the first time, I might only do 4 folds instead of the 6 folds, since I don't want the mozzarella to dry out too much. Another tip is to regularly check the temperatures of the hot water and make sure that you're close to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Also check the temperature of the whey that the curd is resting in to make sure it's not getting too hot. As you can see here, the closer that I had the hot water temperature to 175 degrees Fahrenheit, the faster I was able to form the mozzarella balls. This actually can go pretty quick if you have all of your temperatures at the right degrees. The next tip is about how to treat the mozzarella balls after they've been formed. I place them into a bowl of room temperature water that I prepared before I started the whole process. The bowl of water essentially makes the mozzarella balls weightless in that water, so it allows them to keep the shape that you just formed them to. If these didn't go into water, within 20 minutes they would be pretty flat. I also prefer to use room temperature water instead of cold or ice water because the colder water can shock the mozzarella balls, which will actually make them very tough. I only let the mozzarella balls sit in the room temperature water for 20 minutes. If they sit in the water for much less than this, then they won't really take on their shape as well, and they'll still flatten when you take them out of the water. However, if they sit in the water too much longer than this, then they can become waterlogged. The final tip is about the size of the mozzarella ball that you need to make. As you can see, this is the smallest mozzarella ball that I made for this batch. I didn't need to hold it in the hot water for very long at all, and the curd came together really nicely and smoothly. You can see how much it stretches out and how easily it's stretching. This is just to say that the less cheese curd that you use at a time, the more manageable it is to work with. However, based on what you're using the mozzarella for, you might need to work with larger batches of cheese curd, so just make sure to take that into consideration when you're budgeting your time. After the mozzarella balls have rested in room temperature water for 20 to 25 minutes, you can take them out and serve them as you like. You can eat this fresh, or slice it up to make mozzarella sticks, or put it on top of pizza. This is also a great topping for fresh salads. If you're not going to eat or use the mozzarella right away, you can store it in the fridge for 2 to 3 days. Thanks for watching this video on how to make fresh mozzarella cheese. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe to see more content.